At the conclusion of this lecture, you will be able to understand the role of directors in the operation of a company and the different types of directors, such as executive and non-executive directors, or de jure and de facto directors. We will discuss the ways in which directors are appointed, can lose their office, and the disqualification of directors. You will be able to distinguish between the powers of the board of directors, the managing director and chief executive, and individual directors to bind their company. You will also be able to understand the duties that directors owe to their companies. Starting with the board of directors. It is an executive committee which comprises of directors and chairman. The board of directors runs the company through meetings, policy making, and strategy settings. They have the power to decide on a particular decision and see it being carried out in the method they propose. They essentially control the running of the company. Good corporate governance suggests that the effectiveness of the board is in the points that they should meet regularly and carry out investigations before taking any decision on board. Further directors or members should have a mix of skills in order to bring diversity, and their performance should be assessed regularly. There are a vast number of duties required by directors, and they include, but are not limited to define the purpose of the company and the values by which the company will perform its daily existence, and to identify the stakeholders relevant to the business of the company. The board must then develop a strategy, combining all factors and ensure management implements that strategy. It is collectively responsible for promoting the success of the company by directing and supervising the company's affairs. Its role is to provide entrepreneurial leadership of the company within a framework of prudent and effective controls which enable risk to be assessed and managed. It should set the company's strategic aims, ensure that the necessary financial and human resources are in place for the company to meet its objectives, and review management performance. It should set the company's values and standards, and ensures that its obligation to its stakeholders and others are understood and met. Other tasks include overseeing strategy, monitoring risks, control systems, and governance, monitoring the human capital aspects of the company, managing potential conflicts of interest, ensuring that there is effective communication of its strategic plans, both internally and externally, increasing the reputation of the corporation. Responsibilities of the chairman include leads the board of directors, running the board and setting its agenda, ensuring the board receives accurate and timely information, ensuring effective communication with all shareholders, ensuring that sufficient time is allowed for discussion of controversial issues, taking the lead in board development, facilitating board appraisal, encouraging active engagement by all the members of the board, reporting in and signing off accounts. The Chief Executive Officer is responsible in leading the management team at and below board level. The Chief Executive Officer is the senior executive in charge of the management team and is answerable to the board for its performance. Responsibilities include the Chief Executive Officer is responsible for running the organization's business, for proposing and developing the group's strategy and overall commercial objectives in consultation with the directors and the board. The Chief Executive Officer is also responsible for implementing the decisions of the board and its directors and its committees, developing the main policy statements and reviewing the business's organizational structure and operational performance. The Chief Executive Officer will examine major investments, capital expenditure, acquisitions and disposals, and be responsible for identifying new initiatives. The Chief Executive Officer will make recommendations to the board committees on remuneration, executive remuneration, and terms of employment. The Chief Executive Officer will be responsible for managing the risk profile in line with the risk appetite accepted by the board. The Chief Executive Officer has ultimate ownership of the control systems and should take the lead in establishing the control environment and culture. Part of the Chief Executive Officer role will be to deal with those interested in the company. The Chief Executive Officer will also be concerned with other major stakeholders who impact upon the company's operations, for example, important customers. We will now do a quick comparison between the Chairman and the Chief Executive Officer. The Chairman is often appointed, whereas the Chief Executive Officer is elected among directors. Good governance requires the Chairman to be a non-executive officer, whereas the Chief Executive Officer is often an executive director. Why do we need to separate the two? Both jobs are demanding roles, and ultimately the idea that no one person would be able to do both of the jobs well. Having the same person in both roles means that unfettered power is concentrated into one pair of hands, and the remaining director's input may become ineffective. The separation of roles also reduces the risk of conflict of interest. Separation enables compliance with governance best practices and hence reassures shareholders. There are a number of types of directors, and we will now examine them each in turn. Shadow directors. This is any person other than a professional advisor with whose instructions the directors of the company normally comply. In other words, where a person who is not a director exerts such an influence over the company's directors that those directors are accustomed to acting in accordance with that person's instructions, that person is a shadow director. Alternate directors. Alternate directors are persons who are nominated by a director to act in their absence. An alternate director can only be appointed with the agreement of a majority of the directors. De facto directors. A de facto director is a person who has not been validly appointed, or who is disqualified, but who in effect occupies the position of, and acts as if he were, a director. In addition to the previous legal categories of director, as set out above, other terms are used in business to describe company directors. In practice, company directors are generally categorized as either being executive directors or non-executive directors. However, it is important to note that these are not legal classifications, but rather are distinctions drawn under corporate governance best practice. Regardless of whether an individual is an executive or non-executive director, they have exactly the same legal responsibilities. Executive directors. Executive directors are directors of the company who are involved in the day-to-day management of the company. As these individuals are involved in the management of the company, they may, in practice, have specific titles within the company. For example, managing director, marketing director, finance director, etc. Non-executive directors. Non-executive directors are not involved in the day-to-day management of the company and are appointed from outside the company. The rationale behind appointing non-executive directors is that as they are not involved in the day-to-day management of the company, they can bring an independent voice and perspective to the board. We will deal with the issue of disqualification and directors in more detail in Section H under Presentation 2, under the heading of Criminal and Illegal Activity. Please refer to that presentation for this matter. The first directors are appointed by the subscribers to the Memorandum of Association and are named on the registration form, which is registered at the company's office when the company is formed. The directors automatically take office on the date of incorporation, as per Section 16, Part 6 of the Companies Act 2006. The names and other details of the directors should be entered in the Register of Directors once the company is formed, as per Section 162 of the Companies Act. Subsequent directors are appointed in accordance with the company's articles. The model articles prescribe that any person willing to be appointed by a director and permitted by law to do so can be appointed by ordinary resolution of a general meeting or by resolution of the directors, per Article 1. When a director resigns, the remaining board of directors must be called in order to examine the resignation and either accept or reject the resignation. In conclusion, the chairman is the leader of the board of directors. The chief executive officer is responsible in leading the management team. It is advisable to have the chairman and the chief executive officer separate. There are numerous types of directors, including executive and non-executive directors. Directors are appointed by the subscribers to the Memorandum of Association. Subsequent directors must be appointed by ordinary resolution.